South Korea is the #1 stock market on earth right now. KOSPI was up 76% in 2025, and as of today, it is nearly up 60% in 2026, leading every major global index this year. Not the S&P, not the Nasdaq, Korea. The outperformance comes from two companies, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, the two semiconductor conglomerates that together take 70% of global DRAM supply and rank second and third in global semiconductor revenue. The two giants together account for about 43% of the Korean stock market by value, and compared to the start of 2025, Samsung and Hynix stock value increased by 300% and 635% respectively. In other words, these two companies made KOSPI the world's #1 stock market 2 years running. What is behind this miracle? These two companies are responsible for the global supply of high bandwidth memory, the chip that makes today's AI breakthrough possible. The engine is not slowing down. According to consensus from major brokers, the two companies are projected to earn around $403 billion in 2026, over 6 times last year's figure in just 1 year. However, amid one of the most exciting moments since the company's founding, workers from one of them are unhappy. In about a week, 40,000 Samsung workers will walk off the job, the largest semiconductor strike in Korean history. Today, we will take a deep dive into the most recent controversy in Korea that may stop one of the main engines from pumping out HBM. How much SK Hynix employees are expected to earn, the bonus gap between the two conglomerates, how traditional media is stoking the public to escalate the strike, and the dilemma at the center of this strike, a discussion on stakeholder versus shareholder, with no clean answer for either side. I'm Koo, and welcome to the Koo Report. Let's dive in. Semiconductors mean more to Korea's economy than to almost any other country on earth. The industry accounts for over 20% of all Korean exports, roughly 11% of Korean GDP. In 2025, operating profit from Samsung and SK Hynix combined accounted for 30% of the operating profit of the top 200 listed companies in Korea, which totaled $200 billion. Two companies equal 30% of total operating profit of the top 200 Korean companies. Taking into account the second and third tier vendors of these two companies, if one were to strip memory chips out of Korea, what would be left is a country with a 1990s economy. That is the structural reality of South Korea. Semiconductors are important. Here is what changed in the industry for the last 2 years. For 30 years, memory was the cyclical commodity of the chip industry. DRAM, NAND, both generic and commoditized. As a result, boom 1 year, bust the next. Ecstasy to grief, cycle after cycle. Logic chips own the high margins, the pricing power, and relative immunity to the cycle. AI broke the split. Generative AI does not just need more memory, it needs faster data. Memory chips must sit right next to GPU to pump data as fast as possible. That is HBM. Memory chips stacked vertically for more throughput and placed physically next to the chip, co-designed per generation. In non-tech terms, the stacking creates a superhighway for data to transport in bulk. The tech is rocket science, but just remember this for today. Memory used to be conventional. HBM is anything but conventional. Manufacturing complexity, generation by generation qualification, multi-year supply locked in before a single die ships. In other words, HBM turned the commoditized memory industry into a specialty product industry. Excluding China, only 3 companies make it at scale. In practice, the memory industry became a supplier's market. So it is natural that these companies are sweeping global money. In early 2026, SK Hynix paid out the largest profit share bonus in Korean corporate history. Let us take a look into how happy Hynix employees must be. SK Hynix profit share pool is 10% of operating profit, set by the September 2025 labor agreement with no upper cap. Open SK Hynix audited annual report. 2025. Operating profit, $34 billion. Total full-time headcount, about 35,000 employees. Divide one by the other. Each SK Hynix employee generated about $976,000 in operating profit in a single year. 10% of $976,000 is about $98,000 per worker. Let's now run the same math looking forward. Apply broker consensus to 2026 profits. SK Hynix per worker profit share in 2026 is expected up to $600,000. For 2027, up to $950,000 per worker. Well, I'm not sure where in the world you're listening from, but this per employee average is a lot of money. But quick pause. Those numbers, $600,000 in 2026, almost $1 million by 2027, are exactly what Korean media has been running for 2 months. Big, loud numbers that catch attention. The bonus pool itself is real, but the per worker math is not. 35,000 employees is only counting the headquarters. Consensus profit is a global figure. Divide by SK Hynix global workforce of about 46,000, and the headline drops by a third. And nowhere does anyone disclose how the pool actually splits, which in any reasonable scheme is by individual KPI, by how much each division beat its internal target, with HBM process leads and executives on far heavier multipliers than the operators or back office staff. Also, the 10% is the cap on what management can commit, not a guarantee that the entire pool gets paid out evenly. Media simply got too excited to clickbait the public. We'll keep using these numbers as a ballpark, but read them as headline arithmetic, not as anyone's actual paycheck. Also, if you're enjoying this kind of drill down that headlines don't do, please subscribe. Now, back to the story. Anchor the per worker data against the rest of Korea. The average Korean salaried worker takes home about $32,000 a year. The bonus for 2025, approximately $100,000, was already 3 years of an average Korean's total income, dropped into one bank account in a single month. 2027 estimate of $950,000 per worker, that's about 30 years of an average Korea's total income in one bonus check. After the 2025 payout of $100,000, imported car registrations in Icheon, where SK Hynix locate, doubled. Workers upgrading to BMWs and Mercedes. Icheon streets buzzing with new energy. This is what a near $1 million bonus does to a small Korean city, only to be projected to go upwards in the coming years. But another interesting story is what is happening in Seoul's high school classrooms. South Koreans are obsessed with education. The AI supercycle and potential $1 million paycheck rewired the country's idea of what I should become when I grow up. For about a decade, Korea's top students chose one path: medical. This was never really about passion. It was about defaults. In a country with limited natural resources, a small domestic market, and chronic job insecurity outside the chaebols, the safest play for a top percentile student was the white coat, a license, income protected by law, immunity from industry cycle, the property cycle, and the political cycle. That has been one of Korea's quite structural problems. A nation that builds memory chips for the world, but trains its top 1% to write prescription for itself. In April of this year, that pattern broke at the top. For the first time in modern Korean college admissions, the top semiconductor program, which guarantees a job at SK Hynix on graduation, required a higher grade cut than the average top medical school cutoff. The trend is clear. Smart kids in the country are now choosing fabs over hospital. The safest job in Korea may be the one with the security badge at a memory fab. However, in a world being rewired this fast, Samsung employees are not happy. Let's see why. Samsung Electronics is composed of 4 segments: DX for consumer electronics like the Galaxy smartphones or TV, DS for semiconductors, display, and Harman for automotive. The HBM cycle lifts one of those 4. The other 3 are exposed to consumer demand cycles that have less to do with the AI. So compared to SK Hynix, the Samsung management has more to think about than simply enjoy the supercycle. Moreover, Samsung's bonus has more nuance than the rather simple Hynix model. Long story short, the bonus pool is 20% of the excess profit above an internal target. But the most important part is that the scheme applies a maximum cap to each employee. No employee can receive more than 50% of their own annual salary as bonus. This is where the problem came. SK Hynix bonus pool grows linearly with operating profit. Samsung's pool has more nuance, plus there is a structural cap on how much one can earn, even in the best days. SK Hynix removed its individual cap in September 2025 following internal complaints. Samsung kept its formula. Same industry, same year, fundamentally different math. As a result, up to 40,000 Samsung workers are ready for a massive strike. Let's now drill down into the strike. But first, I'd like to talk about the emotional layer of the story. For Korean workers, Samsung Electronics has historically been the highest status company in the country. The name on a business card brings you better mortgage terms in banks, higher acceptance at the marriage market. That is the social weight Samsung brand carries to us Koreans. That is why employees cannot accept that they came behind SK Hynix in terms of paycheck. It is a stab not only in financial terms, but also in the pride and prestige Samsung workers have been caring for over 30 years. The Samsung Union filed two demands in April. One, replace the current convoluted bonus formula entirely. Make the bonus pool simple and straightforward, 15% of operating profit. Two, remove the 50% individual cap. Make it permanent and put it in writing. The union is not asking to match SK Hynix. The union is asking to exceed SK Hynix scheme. I told you, this is about pride of being Korea's #1 company. The 2026 consensus for Samsung's operating profit is roughly $227 billion, with the bull case approaching $264 billion. At consensus, the 15% pool will be $34 billion. At the bull case, $40 billion. Samsung management is talking about three main reasons that this is hard to implement. First, the structure. Samsung is not SK Hynix. Memory is one piece of Samsung. Foundry, system LSI, displays, mobile, different P&Ls. A single profit-linked formula creates internal inequality between business units. An employee in Galaxy smartphone might have put in the same effort as one in the memory business. How do you justify rewarding one employee over the other? This is already boiling internal conflicts among divisions. Second, reinvestment. In 2025, Samsung's operating cash flow was $61 billion. Of that, $34 billion, or 55%, went into capital expenditure. Management's argument: we cannot pre-commit a permanent 15% of profits to bonuses if profits are also paying for next year's fab. And third is the cycle volatility. Memory swings violently. SK Hynix went from a $5.5 billion loss in 2023 to a $33.7 billion profit in 2025. A fixed 15% bonus during a downturn could mean catastrophic compensation cuts in a single year. Fixed ratio commitments do not survive a memory cycle. Management says no. The union calls the strike. 18 days off the line. Let's see how much that will cost to Samsung. Divide the 2026 expected operating profit of Samsung by 365 days. That is approximately $621 million in operating profit every single day. 18 days off the line plus the ramp down before and the ramp up after adds up to roughly a full month of disrupted operations. At least $1 billion in profit at risk. But there's a deeper problem than the bonus itself. There's a dilemma management has to solve in the coming days. I pulled Samsung's audited annual report for the last 5 years. From 2021 through 2025, Samsung earned $127 billion in operating profit and spent $287 billion on fabs and research combined. In other words, for every $1 of profit earned, $2.30 went back into the ground. Semiconductors are not a profit industry. It is a reinvestment industry. Now overlay the union's demand on Samsung's actual spending, 1 year against 1 year. For the past 5 years, Samsung's average annual fab and research and development spending comes to around $57 billion a year. If the 15% formula passed in 2026, the bonus pool will be $34 billion at consensus, about 60% of 1 year's R&D and capex. At the bull case, $40 billion, close to 70%. 1 year of bonus matches almost a year of R&D and a new factory. That money has to come out of one of three places: capital expenditure, research, or shareholder dividend. There is no fourth bucket. Beaten by your rivals, one has to ask if it is the right call to spend on one-time payouts at the expense of R&D and capex. Samsung only just passed NVIDIA's HBM3E qualification in late 2025, 18 months behind SK Hynix. By early 2026, Samsung just cleared HBM4 qualifications for NVIDIA. In other words, Samsung has a massive pipeline of fabs to build and research to conduct. Workers can take a portion of the profit, but the bigger pie still has to be built. But here is the other side that's giving the managements headaches. If employees are not satisfied with their paycheck, talent will leave the company. In October 2024, it said that 200 Samsung memory engineers applied to a single SK Hynix etching team that had 3 openings. Starting from late 2025, Micron and even Tesla is poaching Samsung and SK Hynix engineers. A Samsung memory engineer with 20 years of HBM process knowledge is the most valuable talent in this AI cycle. If that engineer leaves for Micron or Tesla, the IP leaves with them. In semiconductor manufacturing, talent retention is technology retention. Talent loss is technology loss. Remember, Samsung was not always the global #1 memory chip maker. It poached technology from Japan to outrun its rival and take over the chip hegemony. So this is the real strike. If Samsung pays the 15%, nearly half of the fab and R&D budget for 5 years can vanish. The HBM5 schedule may slip, the capacity that makes the 70% plus margin possible, gone. If Samsung does not pay, its best engineers leave for SK Hynix, Micron, or Taiwan. In other words, the talent that builds the 70% margin are gone. There is no clean answer in either direction. The union is not wrong. Management is not wrong. The country has bet its entire stock market on a question neither side can answer. There are 3 ways a global semiconductor company pays its talent. Korea has chosen one of them, and maybe the most fragile one. First, annual cash bonus. Samsung SK Hynix pays in cash once a year, indexed to operating profit. High variance. Second, cash bonus plus ESPP. In 2022, TSMC added an employee stock purchase plan, 15% subsidized by the company. Engineers can put up to 15% of their salary into TSMC stock at a discount. Bonus pays a year, stock pays the decade. Interest aligned with the long-term future of the company. Restricted stock that vests over 4 years. 15% ESPP discount with a look-back feature. 5% retirement match at Intel. Each one engineered to make leaving expensive. Again, interests are aligned among the management, employee, and shareholder. The level of compensation for a Korean chip worker may now match its global peer, but the way of compensation still a far way to go. A SK Hynix engineer with a $100,000 bonus check has a great year. A Micron engineer with a 15% stock plan discount vesting over 4 years has a great decade. Korea's semiconductor war is being fought with checks. Taiwan's and America's are being fought with stock. Here is what bothers me about the Samsung strike. This is a cyclical business. 5 years ago, the same engineers worked just as hard as today, but the market did not pay. They got nothing. If the same engineers today will not give back the bonus when the cycle drops, then a one-time cash payout at the top is not really compensation for effort. It is a market windfall handed out by timing. The version that actually aligns interest, workers, shareholders pulling in the same direction across cycles is stock. ESPP at a discount, RSUs that vest over years. Employees become long-term owners of the same fab they are building. That is what TSMC, Intel, and Micron figured out. That is what Korea has not. The number 1 market on earth, built on 2 companies paying its workers in a currency designed for a single year. We'll have to see how Samsung management navigates this dilemma in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching the Crew Report. I'm Cool, and I'll see you in the next report.